Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Getting back to work on the Cobra in this video. Last video finished off with getting the heads installed and torqued to spec. This video going to pick up with getting the valve train put in place, the rocker arms, push rods, all that fun stuff, and then getting everything adjusted to the proper specifications. So that being said, going to get this camper turned around and start walking through the process to get the rocker arms and valve train finalized. All right, so first thing I'm going to do is go through all the parts that have to be installed. Rocker arms, stud plates, the studs, push rods, and the keepers. Just wipe off all of like the shipping oil. They've all got like a little film to keep them from rusting and corroding or whatnot. So I'll just take some brake clean on a rag and just go over everything, make sure it's good and clean, and all of that shipping oil and whatnot is removed. And then I can go ahead and start putting in the guide plates and rocker studs and go from there. All right, all the studs and guide plates are loosely in place, they're hand tightened, and then I grabbed a couple of Q-tips, went over the top of all the lifters, and then just kind of threw all the creases and whatnot in the valley there to make sure there wasn't any debris. The big thing was the lifter tops, just to make sure there wasn't anything that was in the damaged push rods, from when cutting old gaskets off, stuff like that. Just want to make sure everything was perfectly clean. So that is done. So next I'm going to go ahead and clean up the push rods, put some moly lube on the ends of those, and then get those put in place. All right, and here's the driver's side. Went ahead, cleaned all these push rods. I put some moly lube on the ends that are on the lifters themselves, put them in place. And then once they're in place, you can go ahead and tighten down the studs and torque them to 55 foot-pounds. I did forget to mention, per the instructions, ARP thread sealer was put on the threads of the studs. It says use thread sealer. I'm not sure if it was supposed to say Loctite, but the instructions say thread sealer. They're blind holes, don't know why, but I did that, followed the rules. So thread sealer is on the bottom of all the studs. They're torqued to 55 foot-pounds. Guide plates are all in place. I'll put moly lube on the actual rocker arms when I put them in as far as that friction point goes, and probably the roller that goes on the valve stem. I have to double check. I think it may say not to put anything on it. I can't remember. As long as it says that it's okay to put something on there, then I'll go ahead and put moly lube on the roller so that it's not dry for when everything goes together. But that being said, I'm gonna go ahead and get the passenger side finished up, and then we can get to the rocker arms. All right, same thing real quick. Driver's side is installed. Everything is torqued to spec. Put sealant on the stud threads and moly lube on the bottom of the push rods. So I am gonna go ahead and get the rocker arms prepped for installation. All right, driver's side is loosely in place. I wiped down all the rocker arms and the retainers with brake cleaner on a rag. All the retainers, I backed out the set screws so they wouldn't come into play. And then as far as installation goes, I went ahead and I was able to put a pretty good glob of moly lube on the cup on the push rod side of the rocker arm, and then also on the roller that's touching the valve. One thing, also make sure that the trunnion, the flat side, is up on all of them. If your trunnion only has one flat side, sometimes it's flat on both sides. These ones, it was round on one, flat on the other. Make sure you're putting it on right so the lock nuts do their jobs. And then I just got I put a little moly lube on the threads of the lock nuts and got those all installed just to start them. I'm gonna go ahead and get the driver's side put into place, or the passenger side put into place real quick, and then it will be time to start the actual adjusting procedure. All right, same thing, driver's side loosely in place, same thing as I did on the other side. Plenty of moly lube, hand tighten the retaining nuts. So now it will be time to go through the actual tightening and adjusting of the valve train. It's basically a step-by-step process, valve by valve. So I'm gonna get things set up, and then I will start walking through how this is done. All right, so I'm gonna start on cylinder number 1 because that's the one I currently have at top dead center. So here are the instructions. You basically turn it, rotate the engine till the exhaust push rod goes down after cycling, and then once it just starts moving up, that's when you can go ahead and adjust the intake rocker, get that set, and then you rotate the engine until the intake valve is open and just closes. That's when you would do the exhaust, because there's overlap, so you have to watch that. I know that there are some people who have you can put it in 4 separate positions and do a bunch in each position. That varies cam to cam. I don't want to mess around, so I'm going to do it cylinder by cylinder, valve by valve, one at a time. You see my little note down there. As far as tightening goes, there's tends to be a range that people say with hydraulic. You can go for, once you get it snug, then go half to 1 turn, somewhere in there. I'm going to go 3/4 turn on everything. And basically what you're going to be doing when doing these is tightening down on the nut and, while moving the push rod around. And once you get to the point where the push rod has no up and down movement whatsoever, that is where you stop, and that's when you do your 3/4 turn, and then you can snug up the lock nut. So I'm going to go ahead, get started on cylinder number 1. I'll come back and just, once I have this ready to go, and go from there. All right, so I just rotated the crank and I got it to the point where the exhaust just started moving up. So that is the time where you're going to start tightening down the intake side. So right there, still have plenty of wiggle room. So just keep turning until we get to the point where there's no more play in the push rod. Just keep going and going and going. And that's pretty much it right there. Back off a little bit. Yeah, I got a tiny bit up and down there. No more up and down there. So that's it. So from there, just turn it 3/4, and then I can set the set screw. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that real quick. All right, and here we go. First one is set. You can see I've got the set screw down. I did 3/4 turns just based on the room that I have to work with. And then once that was done, I used the Allen key to run it down, tighten it while holding the 5/8 wrench. It's a 5/8 wrench, and the Allen key is, I'm trying to get it like, it's a 3/16 Allen key, at least for this set of rockers. So yeah, I tightened it down while holding the wrench. And then once that was tight, I did one little quick bump just to really set it. You put the wrench on, have this torqued down pretty good, and then just do a quick whap on it, and that sets it a little bit more. So intake is set, and now will be time to do the exhaust. So for doing the exhaust side, what you do is continue rotating the engine until the intake comes up, hits max lift, and then just starts to close. When it just starts to close, that's when you can go ahead and tighten down on the exhaust side. So I'm going to go ahead, rotate this over, find that sweet spot, and get this one set. All right, and I got it rotated, intake opened all the way and is on the very start of the closing, so that definitely has the exhaust where it needs to be. So I can go ahead, tighten this down. And just grab the push rod, back it off a little bit, a little up and down there, and right there is where it's just starting to grab, no more up and down. So same thing, 3/4 turn on this, then set the set screw, and then do a little bump to lock it in place. So I'm gonna go ahead and get that done. All right, here we go. Exhaust side is set as well, nice and tight, everything's good. Did the same thing, 3/4 turn, snug the set screw, and then one bump before I pulled the wrench off. So 2 down and 14 left to go. So again, cylinder by cylinder, I'm gonna move my way down, finish this bank, and then head over to the driver's side, get that bank done, and I will come back once everything is set and in place. All right, just a quick check-in. Bank number 1, well, passenger side bank is all set. Everything's set in place, so I'm gonna head over to the driver's side, get started. One thing I do want to say, which it should go without saying, but just in case you do not know, it will get harder to spin the crankshaft as you do each one, because you're going to be fighting valve springs, one by one by one, adding them in. So just keep that in mind. But if you do feel all of a sudden a major tension, strain, something like that, where it will not move, do not force it. You do not want to break or bend anything. But you may run into some issue, like you'll hear a noise of a hydraulic adjuster collapsing or whatnot, as the spring is getting depressed. So things like that, just keep that in mind. You will run into more tension as you go along the chain, and just make sure you're not fighting anything that is like a serious detriment. So that being said, I'm gonna head over to the driver's side and get started there. All right, and there we go. Driver's side is all done. Everything is set to spec. So I'm gonna go ahead, get this thing spun over and get it back to top dead center. It's almost already there. You can see the intake lifters on it, or is either up or on its way down, but it's out of the bore, so just need a little bit of turning on the crank, and then I'll get this thing back to top dead center, and then I can move on to the next part of the project. All right, so next on the list, I think I'm gonna go ahead and get the intake reinstalled. That way I can get this center valley all covered up and keep dust and whatnot of it, not have to keep covering it up every night. So I'm gonna go ahead and get the intake manifold cleaned up from all the old gasket material, and then come back and we can go ahead and get this thing installed. All right, and the same thing as the block deck, went over this. First I tried scraping off with a razor blade, carefully, and then used the softer wire wheel and got all the gasket material off. The biggest areas are going to be around the cooling ports, and then the front and rear, where the deck meets, we're going to be the silicone. So this is all cleaned off. So next on the list, I'm going to go ahead, wipe this all down with some brake cleaner, make sure there's no grease or residue behind. Do the same thing on the engine mating surfaces, but I do think I'll before doing that, I'm going to pour some oil on the lifters and whatnot, just to make sure I fill those valleys back up for now, before I pop this on. Just since it's been sitting there for a while and everything's been draining away, just help to get a little bit in those bores and whatnot. All right, a couple quick things before I actually do the final install, the intake. I did go ahead, poured some oil in there. You can see it in the lifter valley. Got all the lifters and pushrod bases all covered, just to make sure that there is plenty of oil there. Also went ahead and reconnected the ground to this cylinder head. So don't forget to do that, because that would be pretty important. Don't want to burn the car to the ground. So next thing I'm gonna do is grab the intake manifold and just test fit it before putting any sealant down. Make sure that there's no issues with the GT40 P heads that I had previously. It was a really tight fit to squeeze it between the lips on the cylinder heads. So I just want to make sure there's not going to be any issues there before doing the final installation with silicone, because I'd hate to put down the silicone and then find out I have a problem. So I'm going to do this real quick and then come back. All right, well, that worked out well. Test fitted, everything laid into place as required. So I'm gonna go ahead, go over all the mating surfaces with brake clean, make sure it's all good, both all the block surfaces as well as the intake surfaces. Then I can go ahead and get the gaskets laid down and get ready to do the install. I'll be back here in a minute. All right, so I'm using Felpro 1250 gaskets, and I'm also gonna use Right Stuff 90-minute gray. This stuff works awesome. As far as the gaskets go, the two front coolant ports, I trimmed out the little tab. These have because they're a universal fit. I pulled out that little block because it's not needed on this engine. Just for the front ones, the rear ones, as you can see, it's in place. There's nothing that flows through the cylinder or the intake manifold for the rears. So I got those trimmed for each side, and then as you can see, sealant on both the front and the rear wall. Make sure you get it into the crack between the head and the block. There's a tiny little crack there where the gasket doesn't quite fill. That is a very common leak point. And then I put a little bit around the coolant ports, the 4 of them, just to make sure that the intake gasket will seat really nice on those. So I'm gonna go ahead, lay the intake gaskets in place, get the intake manifold cleaned off, and get it installed. All right, well, the intake manifold is laying in place. I've got the bolts hand tightened. I'm gonna go ahead, grab a torque wrench, start going through the torque process. Basically just follow the factory spec as far as torque goes. I'm gonna grab the Haynes manual, get the order and specs, and go from there. All right, so I went through, torqued everything. Here is the order. Everything gets torqued down, and then you start at 7 foot-pounds, then 15, then 24. I went around the 24 a second time. Everything moved some. I'm sure if I go a third time, it will. What I'm gonna do is let it sit overnight and then come back at it tomorrow. And then I can go ahead and maybe make a round or two with the 24 pounds again, just to make sure that everything is torqued to spec and there's no more movement in either of the bolts. And with that, I think I'm gonna call this a video here. Got a lot done, and it's kind of gone on long enough. Next video, I will pick up probably doing one more round or 2 more rounds as far as torque and the intake down, and then I'll be just continuing with putting the engine back together with the goal of getting this thing up and running here in the near future. So if you're enjoying what you're seeing, if you want to follow along, see how things turn out, please hit like, please hit subscribe, please hit the notification bell. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comments section below. Do read them, we'll respond. Do appreciate any comments you leave, because they do help with the algorithm. That being said, thank you very much for watching, and have a great day.